Seen from outside, this is an incredibly bold endeavor. The audacity of trying and starting something which had never been tried the world over is immediately perceived from the new hemisphere or from Asia, from out of Europe, if I may, to be incredibly bold. And you see only the boldness. Seeing that boldness, that might explain that you consider absolutely, I would say, predictable that in the worst financial crisis since World War II, the very existence of the euro area would be put into question. The audacity, extreme audacity, absence of historical precedent makes the conclusion very easy to make. Seen from Europe, very curiously, at the very beginning, before the crisis, the Europeans were not really aware of the boldness of their historical endeavor. They were referring to a long-standing, underlying historical process, starting with the speech of Robert Schuman in the year 1950 and going through a number of successive big advances, including, of course, the EMU, which is the last extremely big advance of the deeper and deeper union that the Europeans perceive as the historical underlying endeavor that is designed to ensure at the level of the continent stability, prosperity, and peace after 200 years of wars. Both, if I may, observers or participants inside Europe and outside Europe are right. There is in the EMU both extreme boldness and an underlying very powerful historical endeavor. And that explains why we had both the observation of the fact that the epicenter of the crisis has been in the euro area, in the third episode of the crisis, the sovereign risk crisis, and that's absolutely obvious. But at the same time, the historical endeavor underlying explains why, in this dramatic crisis, and despite being the epicenter, at the epicenter of the crisis, the euro as a currency remained constantly credible, and the euro area as a particular grouping of countries remained remarkably solid. Let me only mention en passant, as regards the euro, that it kept its value on the exchange market better during all the crises than the level it had at the moment of its setting up, $1.17. We were constantly over and above that level during all the crises, which demonstrates to which extent the sentences of the kind, the euro is about to collapse, we do that to save the euro and so forth, was not at all corresponding to the reality. The reality was that the market participants had confidence constantly in the euro. And I mentioned, we are in Switzerland, I mentioned en passant that the euro was sufficiently credible for the central bank to decide that it was not bad to have some kind of asymmetric relationship to the euro. I mentioned that en passant, but this is something which tells something on the euro. On the other hand, let me remind you also something which is even more extraordinary, because the euro area was at the epicenter of the global crisis since end of 2009, beginning of 10. And still, at the moment of Lehman Brothers' $50 15 countries were members of the euro area at the time. At the moment I'm speaking, and we are now 6 years after the Lehman Brothers collapsed, more than 6 years. At the moment I'm speaking, the 15 countries that were in the euro area at the moment of this collapse are still there and on the basis of decisions which are taken by their democracies, and 3 new countries entered, 2 Baltic states and Slovakia. So that at the moment I'm speaking, we are 18. And as you know, 3rd Baltic state will enter next January. So we were 15 at the moment of the collapse of Lehman Brothers, and we will be 19 next January. So this is not to say that we had not incredible weaknesses which explain that we were the epicenter of the crisis. But it also captures, better than it was understood perhaps until a recent period, that the resilience, the underlying resilience, which is, in my opinion, reflecting the strength of this underlying historical process, is also very, very impressive. Now let me turn to the question, why is it that the epicenter of the financial crisis crossed the Atlantic when it appeared that it had morphed into a sovereign risk crisis? I see, and please consider what I will say as title for your questions when we are in the question and answer session, because I don't want to be too long on that, but I trust that it is very important that you have these 6 reasons in mind. First, the euro area countries did not respect the Stability and Growth Pact. You might remember, or you might not remember, that when I was appointed in 2003, my first battle was vis-à-vis France and Germany, helped by Italy, that wanted not to apply to themselves the Stability and Growth Pact and wanted to redraft the Stability and Growth Pact. I was making the point that it was an enormous mistake, that we had no political federation, that we had no federal budget, and we had a single currency. The quid pro quo for having a single currency without having an achieved political federation was the Stability and Growth Pact. We needed rules and framework for the budget of the country, of the member country. That was not fully understood, I have to say, at the time, neither by the countries concerned, nor, unfortunately, by a large number of economists that were thinking that the Stability and Growth Pact was too tight a jacket on the European. So that's the first point, first cause for the problem we had in the euro area at this period. Second cause, very, very important too, there was no monitoring of the relative competitiveness of the various member countries. Some countries were reinforcing their competitiveness in terms of unit labor cost in particular, others were losing competitiveness. The ECB discovered that it was probably the major problem of the euro area, those divergences of both, I would say, relative competitiveness and external imbalances, so that I wrote a letter to the governments in 2005 to tell them, look, you have to look at that because the divergences are confirmed over a relatively long period. We started the euro area the 1st January 1999, and we could see that even during all those years there was no correction but divergences. And we circulated systematically at all the meetings of the Eurogroup to all governments of the euro area the evolution of the unit labor cost and of a number of other competitive indicators including the external imbalances. Without consequences, I have to say, because the market were very kind. They were financing all the deficits in Europe, and it was very, very difficult to make all the governments aware of the fact that this was dangerous. Third reason why we were at the epicenter of the crisis, at least some countries were at the epicenter of the crisis, the absence of banking union. Very simply, you had a vicious circle and a virtuous circle functioning in the euro area. The weak countries had appeared to the external investors and savers as very poor potential backstops for their banks. So they were weakening their banks because the potential backstop appeared to be non-credible. And of course, there was a number of other reasons, the fact that they had risks on weak countries or non-credible countries, but all that together created this vicious circle. The absence of creditworthiness of the country was creating additional absence of creditworthiness of the banks, which in turn was, had a bearing of the creditworthiness of the country. And the virtuous circle in the countries that were highly credible was also functioning with their banks, helped potentially by a very credible backstop, and therefore having no particular difficulty to refinance themselves and so forth. This phenomenon was observed in all advanced economy without exception. But in the euro area, it stretched even more the distance between the various countries member, I would say amplifying the differences created by the absence of respect of the Stability and Growth Pact and by the absence of monitoring of the evolution of relative competitiveness. You had a fourth point, which was the absence of a crisis management tool. There was no stability mechanism. And of course, this can be explained because nobody was foreseeing such a drama in the advanced economy. But of course, in the case of Europe, it was particularly difficult to create from scratch a crisis management tool when in the US, for instance, you had only one decision-making process to have the TARP mechanism or any kind of other mechanism that would be deemed to combat the crisis.